Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. This one, are werewolves real? Spoiler alert, no, they're not real. It's a legend. If you're watching this video expecting to be like, oh, maybe they are real, you're in the wrong place because we just shit all over joyful ideas like, well, werewolves are kind of scary, aren't they? Anyway, the format of the show, Katie writes it, I read it. Let's jump in. When writing on topics like this in the past, I've had to make decisions as to whether to preserve some sort of yes, but could it be real aspect to the story. Well, we've been through enough of those together now to not have to worry about playing it so coy. I don't believe that anyone watching this truly thinks that werewolves are real. So instead of trying to drag out... End of the episode. Done! So instead of trying to drag some scraps of that narrative over the finish line, let's instead accept it as read and just have a really nice, informative deep dive into the history and lore of this, because it really is a topic worth investigating. Is this the first time a writer has debunked the topic before, Simon? Probably not. You know why we know that? Because everyone's like, oh no, werewolves aren't real. No one's like transforming into a werewolf under the full moon. That's ridiculous. Does it need debunking? No. Have people done it anyway? Yes. Are there some people on YouTube, I'm sure, I swear to God, like they'll be like, I'm a werewolf. The internet's a weird place, man. People will. March is madness. It's not just basketball madness. It's everything madness. Noise everywhere. Distractions non-stop. Well, that's where Raycon's everyday earbuds enter the picture. These things are incredible. They've got active noise cancellation so you could drown out the chaos. Look, whether you're at the gym, whether you're at work, whatever you're up to, block it out with Raycon so you could focus on doing what you do, whether that's work or working out or all of that good stuff. It's just super easy. Plus, they've got multi-point connectivity so you can seamlessly switch between your phone and your laptop without having to do the ridiculous Bluetooth pair on repair dance, which no one likes. Plus, insane 32 hours of battery life and a quick charge feature that gives you 90 minutes of playtime in just 10 minutes. Plus, they start about half the price of other premium earbuds without skimping on the quality. They've also got these new beautiful cases. This one's kind of a marbly look, which I really like. So not only does it look cool, but it also protects your Raycons. Fantastic. Go to buyraycon.com/unknown to get 20% off the best-selling everyday earbuds. Click the link in the description below. And this, of course, is brought to you by Raycon. And now back to today's video. I'm sure most people have looked up at a full moon and had some thoughts about werewolves. They've become synonymous, a perfect glowing circle in the sky and the transformation of a human into a snarling, bloodthirsty wolf thing. The idea of a human transforming into a wolf has roots that go back longer than you might think. But how has this story endured? Why were people accused of being able to shapeshift into animals? What's the moon got to do with anything? Will the editor insert any cringe Twilight memes into this episode? I hope so.
You better hold on tight, spider monkey.
Twilight's such garbage. It's really bad. I saw the second one in the cinema, and we've talked about this before. Couldn't remember why. Someone in the comments suggested that I was probably on a date with someone, and I think that probably is the only explanation for why I went to see the second Twilight movie, because there's no other possible way that I would go and do that. Let's dive into this lupine legend and decode these questions and probably some more along the way. Werewolves? The myth of the werewolf. Werewolves are part of the supernatural monster canon, along with sometimes literal fellow housemates, vampires, ghosts, witches, etc. They could be said to represent an interesting duality of human nature, the controlled person by day and a raging beast by night. The stories of the transformation of a human into an animal go back as far as storytelling goes, but apparently the first recorded example of a human turning into a wolf is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a poem, obviously an epic one, written sometime between 2000 BCE and around 1200 BCE. Never read Gilgamesh. I'm not particularly well read. I know, I just read it and just end up confused to be like, wait, what's going on? And is it poetry like as we know poetry today, or is it... I know literally nothing about this. I'm just going to carry on. In the poem, it comes from ancient Mesopotamia and is basically about Gilgamesh's quest for immortality. In the poem, there's a goddess called Ishtar who wants to sleep with our main man Gilgamesh, but he finds out that she'd turned a previous lover into a wolf after she got bored of him and then was torn apart by his own hunting dogs. So he decides against it. Probably a good move. Probably a good move, old there, Gilga. Gilga's like,
Yeah, but she's really hot. Maybe it's worth it.
classic Gilgamesh, dude. While this isn't really what we think of when we think of werewolves, it does repeatedly come up as the earliest written example. And if we had to mention it, I'm sure there'd be lots of lovely comments about it. The name werewolf comes from the Old English, as the word were meant man, and I guess wolf meant wolf. So put them together and you get man-wolf. There are some differences in the way werewolves are depicted, but generally speaking, folklore has it that a person, usually a man... Oh yeah, I do. Werewolf? I was going to say, what's the equivalent? Werewoman? But there's obviously no gender in that name. Use your brain, Simon. Transforms under the influence of a full moon into either a full-on wolf or some sort of large human-wolf hybrid. These werewolves are bloodthirsty, with the mind of an aggressive animal, and will hunt for prey, be it animal or human. When the sun comes... So they're basically just a wolf. I mean, the biggest problem with werewolves is it's like suddenly there's a wolf on the loose. Wolves are fucking scary, dude. You ever seen that movie, The Grey? I think it's with Liam Neeson. I saw this years ago. It's a scary movie, dude. They're all just hunted down by wolves in, like, Siberia or some shit. It's really not a nice movie. It's a good movie, but it's like... It's sad, man. They're all just hunted down by wolves. Spoiler alert, everyone dies. When the sun comes up, they transform back into their human form, usually with no memory of the night's activities, but maybe with injuries or bloody reminders of what they might have got up to. Well, look, if you're a werewolf, right, and you don't like being a wolf, but you can't do anything about it, like one night a month when the moon is full, you're going to turn into... You just install like a big... It's a wolf. Like... Just lock yourself in the basement. It's not going to be able to figure out the lock. It's a wolf. Other variations include having superhuman strength while in wolf mode, and also the rules aren't set on transformation. Sometimes they only transform under the full moon, and in other cases they can transform whenever they want, but are also forced to do it on the full moon. Okay then. That's a new one to me. In some circles, there is also a difference between werewolves and lycanthropes, or lycans, but this is usually in genre fiction, and I don't know if we need to get into the nitty-gritty of the differences between supernatural human-wolf transformations, but we'll see how it goes. I'm already excited to get into the nitty-gritty of wolf transformations. Yes, it's what I'm here for! Traditionally, silver objects, usually in the form of bullets, are how people go about killing werewolves. Well, if that was for vampires, isn't silver bullets how you kill a vampire? Or is that really werewolves? All right. Along with staples that will reliably dispatch most living things, fire, cutting out their hearts, and or decapitation. You may have heard of a plant called wolfsbane. I have, which sounds like it would be the bane of wolves, and indeed it is poisonous and was actually used to kill wolves and other carnivores when left in raw meat as bait. If you remember anything from Potions class, you may recall that wolfsbane is also known as monk's hood and aconite. I've never heard of either of those, but I have heard of wolfsbane. I knew it was poisonous, that's about it. Either way, it is also sometimes used against werewolves. No, it's not, because werewolves are not real. There is more than one way to become a werewolf. Oh, I'd never even considered the different ways of becoming a werewolf. The vampires, right, they have to bite you, and then you become a vampire. I remember, I read these, I must have been like a teenager, so it was probably like young adult fiction or whatever, but it was this whole long series about this woman who becomes a vampire, but she's like, oh no, you can't just bite people, you have to like exchange blood with them. And I think they ended up building a rocket. Huh? Am I having some crazy, like, fake memory? There was a series of books about a female vampire, and at some point, they build, like, a space rocket with nuclear bombs.
That rules. That kicks ass.
This must have been a dream. This can't possibly be a real book series that I read. It was red. I think it had a red cover. Oh, God, I remember. YouTube's amazing. Someone in the comments let me know. Yo, ChatGPT, what's up? So when I was a kid, either this is like a false memory, or I remember reading a book, a series of books about vampires, and the main character was a woman who was a vampire. She became a vampire, I think, in the series, and it was about her adventures. And in this book, the way that they would turn people into vampires would not be to bite them, but they had to do like a blood transfusion or whatever. And in one of these books, I swear they build like a rocket, like a spacecraft, and it's like using nuclear bombs to like launch it into space or something. I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm probably misremembering, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Hey Simon, that sounds like the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series by Laurel K. Hamilton. The protagonist, Anita Blake, is a vampire hunter who becomes a vampire later on in the series. The books do feature some unique takes on vampirism and might have the elements you're remembering. The rocket with nuclear bombs part might be a mix-up, but it could also be from a different series or a specific plotline that stood out to you. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, but I really wanted to know whether the nuclear bomb rocket thing was in this series, because that's like the distinguishing factor.
I couldn't find any mention of a nuclear bomb rocket plot in the Anita Blake series.
All right, I must have been smoking crack that day, because obviously it sounds insane, because it is. It's just so ridiculous. That can't be real. Wait, do they go to space at all in that series?
No, the Anita Blake series doesn't involve space.
All right, that makes sense, because it's a book about werewolves, not about fucking space travel, Whistle Boy. All right, back to it. I'm sorry, I know that's like a 5-minute pointless tangent. Let's get back to it. There is more than one way to become a werewolf. Oh my god, is that where we stop for that whole tangent with ChatGPT? I apologize. The traditional way is to be attacked by one, so being bitten or scratched while the aggressor is in wolf form. There are also things such as if you drink downstream from one, or drink rainwater out of a werewolf's paw print, you'll become a werewolf if you don't die of dysentery first. Jesus Christ, how thirsty do you have to be like, oh, there's a little indentation of a paw print in the ground. I'm going to drink the filthy water out of that. There are also children born from werewolves who carry the curse genetically, and in some stories, doing something as simple as slinging a wolf's skin over you could be enough. The ability of a human to turn into a werewolf is known as lycanthropy, but this is also a psychiatric condition in which a human believes they can turn into a wolf. More of which later. You imagine, you go to the psychiatrist and you're like, I think I can turn into a wolf. And they're like, you can't. Thanks, Doc. Who wolves? Historical werewolves. While there is a mythology behind the werewolf story, there are also countless historical and literary examples that we can point to that either added to the myth or were directly influenced by it. So let's go over some of the more well-known ones. As well as the Epic of Gilgamesh that we mentioned earlier, the term lycanthropy itself links nicely to King Lycaon of Greek mythology fame. Right, yes. Lots of fame there, because I've definitely heard of old King Lycathon there. The Greek word lykos means wolf, and anthropos means human being or man. So this time, the translation is wolfman. A guy named King Lycaon winds up becoming a wolf. I mean, what are the odds? Well, he wasn't a real person, he was made up, so that probably explains it. He turns up in a couple of ancient texts, one of which is Ovid's Metamorphoses. In Book 1, this epic poem, written around the year 8 CE, Lycaon kills a hostage and tries to get Zeus, the king of the gods, to eat them. But Zeus doesn't fall for it, and destroys Lycaon's house and turns him into a wolf. One translation of this part from poetryandtranslation.com says this about Lycaon's transformation. He himself ran in terror, and reaching the silent fields, howled aloud. Frustrated of speech, foaming at the mouth and greedy as ever for killing, he turned against the sheep, still delighting in blood. His clothes became bristling hair, his arms became legs. He was a wolf, but kept some vestige of his former shape. There were the same grey hairs, the same violent face, the same glittering eyes, the same savage image. Here's another translation found in the Book of Werewolves by Sabine Baring-Gould. In vain he attempted to speak. From that very instant his jaws were bespluttered with foam, and he only thirsted for blood as he raged against flocks and panted for slaughter. His vesture was changed into hair, his limbs became crooked. A wolf, he retains yet a large trace of his ancient expression. Hoary as he is afore, his countenance rabid, his eyes glitter savagely, the picture of fury. Wow, this was really open for translation, wasn't it? These are very different. I mean, it's like vaguely the same, but you're not going to get dinged for copyright on that, are you? The element of maintaining some kind of recognizable characteristic has also been kept in the werewolf canon. We know that people come in all shapes, sizes, and looks, but in medieval times, in Europe especially, if you had a unibrow, were excessively hairy, had low-set ears, or had long, sharp fingernails, your chance of being pegged as a werewolf went up exponentially. Well, how about you shave if I don't shave my between my eyebrows, I'll get a unibrow. Of course I will. Lots of people will. You just I don't know, I shaving my neck or whatever, and you're just like, oh, it looks a bit like, and then you trim it because I don't want people to think I'm a werewolf or that I have a unibrow. And then just, I don't know, trim your nails like a normal person. I saw someone the other day who definitely must have had a medical condition because their nails were like super thick. And I'm like, that seems like scary, but also potentially useful. And I guess I could have looked it up. I'm just not sure what caused that. I'd never seen it before. I've got one toe that's really weird because I busted my toenail like when I was a kid. and it just never really grew back right, so it's all weird and thick. But, like, on every finger, that bro is definitely a werewolf. Another supposed tell was that a person would have hair or bristles under their tongue. But come on, for one thing, that's really gross. And also, I don't know if anyone's had hair growing under their tongues. Oh, how did this even become a sign? I bet there's some people who have that. Like, it's just, you know, there's lots of people, especially when you, like, all throughout history. There's gonna be weird shit. ChatGPT, why are you still listening to me? It's creepy, dude. Moving on, there are links to wolves in the creation of Rome story too. Twin boys were born, who were the grandnephews of the current ruler, King Amulius, who had usurped their grandfather. Seeing them as a threat, he ordered them to be killed, and they were left by a river, which doesn't seem a very surefire way of doing it. Indeed, it wasn't, and they were cared for by a she-wolf who even suckled them with her own wolf milk. They were eventually found and raised by humans, and were named Romulus and Remus. Long story short, Romulus killed Remus and founded the city of Rome. This worked out because his name was already pretty similar to Rome, so it would have been a bit awkward if Remus had won, because that's how it happens. The drinking of the wolf's milk detail is an iconic part of the story, and you've probably seen images of statues depicting it. Indeed, I have. Romulus and Remus stayed in a cave with the wolf, which became known as the Lupercal, and was located at the bottom of the hill on which Rome was supposedly founded. This also became the location for the ancient Roman festival of Lupercalia, which sounds like it must have something to do with wolves, but opinion remains split as to its significance. It seems to involve the sacrifice of goats and dogs, and then the leaders chasing everyone around almost naked, waving strips of the animal's flayed skin. Jesus Christ. What are you guys up to? Being hit with one of those bloody strips of shaggy thongs, as a translation of something Plutarch wrote called them, was supposed to aid your fertility journey. Right, so skinning an animal, did they do it alive? No, they sacrificed them first, at least that. But just whipping people with the skin of dead animals. It's like, this is going to increase my fertility. Oh, the past. Some scholars say that Lupercalia was held in honor of the Roman god Lupercus, protector of sheep from wolves. You did a bit of a shit job, Lupercus, didn't you? But apparently this is not necessarily the origin of the festival. My uncle used to keep chickens. And he was like, yeah, the foxes. I mean, he was like, yeah, there's a new cage. We put it like that. And then we put this in. And he's like, motherfucker. Foxes are smart, dude. They like dig under things. They work their way through tiny holes, and then they slaughter the chickens. I know this has nothing to do with wolves slaughtering sheep, but it just reminded me of a horrible story of my uncle's chickens always getting killed. There isn't really anything obvious about the werewolf myth in this story, but seeing as the standout image of the founding of Rome involves 2 young children and a wolf, I thought it was worth mentioning. It's also, look at us getting educated, Katie. Technically, a werewolf is a human that transforms into a wolf temporarily and then changes back into a human. Staying in the ancient times for a bit longer, because otherwise you'd just be a regular-ass wolf or a regular-ass human, wouldn't you? Staying in the ancient times for a bit longer, the Guinness Book of World Records gives the title of earliest description of a werewolf to Greek historian Herodotus, writing in his Histories in about 430 BCE. In Book 4, he makes mention of the Nuri people, who lived near the border of the Scythian people. They had apparently had to flee their original homelands due to an infestation of snakes, but also had the ability to shapeshift. The Guinness website gives this quote from the Histories. It may be that these people are wizards for the Scythians, and the Greeks settled in Scythia say that once a year every one of the Nuri becomes a wolf for a few days and changes back again to his former shape. Sounds rather inconvenient, doesn't it? So it isn't just one person doing it, it's the whole Nuri population. While he included it in his book, Herodotus does point out that he didn't witness this and doesn't actually believe the story himself, saying, I do not believe this tale, but all the same, they tell it, and even swear to the truth of it. This reminds me of a Tommy Lee Jones line in A Country for Old Men. I haven't seen that movie in ages. That's a good movie, right? I remember that movie. When he says a true story, I couldn't swear to every detail, but it's certainly true that it is a story. Werewolf lore also has roots in shamanism, as shapeshifting is one of the best known features. For shapeshifting could mean either a complete physical transformation into an animal, or the shaman taking on the characteristics of an animal. Well, I mean, the second one's that's quite possible, you know? My son's often, like lately, he really likes cats. And he's like, Dad, meow, I'm a cat. And I'm like, sure you are, boy, sure you are. He took on the characteristics of a cat. That's entirely possible. For him to transform into a cat, unrealistic. Shamans are very in tune with the natural world, and as some wolves were hanging around humans many thousands of years ago and ended up becoming domesticated, the link between them runs quite deep. A piece of art from the Upper Paleolithic period, found in the cave of the Trois Frères? Three brothers. Trois Frères? Is that correct? Did I get that right? GCSE French, baby. I got a C.
Failure.
Not a good grade. It's been described as showing a shaman in various forms of animal transformation. It's called The Sorcerer, and in a sketch made of the original artwork by Henri Breuil, you can see a mixture of human arms and legs, an owl's head, alright, antlers, and what looks like a horse's body and tail. There's also a little genital thing. There is, I just looked at it. It's like a backwards penis coming out of its bottom. It kind of looks like it's taken a double shit, but I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to where that came from. It's really weird. It's really weird looking. What is that? The only other thing about this sketch that isn't necessarily a faithful representation of what was actually in the cave, as some people have said, that Breuil drew antlers that were really just cracks in the wall. A photograph of what is left of the original artwork is somewhat less impressive. Oh my, yeah, no. Wait, the dude's one looks way better. Why did he draw that penis in there? Why did he draw the reverse penis? That's not in the original. He's just taking some creative liberties with that penis. Wolves even have a backstory in the life of Mongolian warlord Genghis Khan. According to The Secret History of the Mongols, which is the oldest surviving Mongolian literary work, wow, they really clickbaited the shit out of that title for back in the day, didn't they? Sounds like something I'd call a video. Khan is literally descended from a wolf. The book starts, quote, "At the beginning, there was a blue-grey wolf, born with his destiny ordained from heaven above. His wife was a fallow doe. They came across the Tengiz. After they had settled at the source of the Anan River on Mount Burkhan Khaldan, Batak Chikwan was born to them. This family line eventually gets to Genghis Khan, as we all know that 1 in 200 or 0.5% of the male population still carries his genes. That's a lot of wolf ancestry going on, except that it's symbolic and not literal, of course." Another historical link to werewolves is that of the Berserkers, and some historians think that this is where the European versions of the werewolf legend come from. Famously aggressive in battle, these Viking warriors wore bear or wolf skins, which were said to help them channel the ferocity of these animals into their fights. Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson wrote of them in 1225, quote, "His own men went to battle without coats of mail and acted like mad dogs or wolves. They bit their shields and were as strong as bears or bulls. They killed people, and neither far nor arn affected them. This is called Berserker rage." The name Berserker itself apparently comes from an Old Norse word meaning wolf coat, so we could definitely draw a thread connecting these warriors covered in wolf skins to people transforming into wolves and becoming mindless, violent killing machines. Side note, if you're of a certain age, it's impossible to hear the word berserker without thinking of the line, "My love for you is like a truck."
My love for you is like a truck berserker.
As well as some much ruder ones, but that's a tangent too far, so let's get back on track. Wait. If you're of a certain age. I'm not of that certain age. I have no idea what this is or what this means. Wolves are also framed as the bad guys in many stories that we know from our childhoods. There's the big bad wolf. Oh yeah, he swallows grandma and tries to trick Little Red Riding Hood before being cut open by a woodcutter, drowning from a stomach full of stones, or just running off, depending on which version you're reading. Yeah, fairy tales for kids, as I mentioned many times, super creepy. There's also the big bad wolf who blows down the little pig's houses before meeting his end by falling into a pot of boiling water. Wait, that's how the Three Pigs ends? I don't remember that at all. I just thought he couldn't blow down the brick house. And then he leaves. No, they boil him alive. And the big bad wolf who tricks and eats 6 out of 7 baby goats before drowning from a stomach full of stones. Again, the big bad wolf trope has survived for centuries and still crops up in modern day entertainment such as Doctor Who and the children's books and movie series, The Bad Guys. I've recently been watching Yellowstone, and in the last episode I saw Casey's being followed by a wolf. Tribal leader Thomas Rainwater tells him, "Man and wolf evolve together. We form packs like they do. We raid territories like they do. They destroy enemies like we do. And we have tried everything in our power to destroy them. Before guns and bows, they tried everything to destroy us. It is said the wolf exists to manage the spread of man, and man exists to manage the spread of wolf." Look, I've got some news for you, Rainwater, sorry. Like, if we wanted to destroy wolves, eradicate wolves, we absolutely could. We're really good at shit. Like, we've got all sorts of powerful weapons. We could maybe even do some James Bond shit, like get some special disease that could just kill all of the wolves. If we really wanted them gone, they would be gone. We've dominated them. We can dominate them. Basically, as an animal that's shared space with humans for millennia, the wolf is an enduring and popular totem or symbol in many countries around the world. It can be a useful member of a pack, it can survive on its own, it can be aggressive, it can be docile, it's intelligent and it's wild, so yeah, but not as intelligent as us, because we've got guns. And potentially genetic weapons. So it's no real wonder that the major shape-shifting supernatural storyline that persists to this day is that of a human turning into a wolf. What wolves? Werewolf-specific mythology. So let's get back to the meat of the episode and explore some of the details of the werewolf legend, starting with the moon. According to popular lore, when the moon is full, anyone afflicted with the curse of the werewolf will turn into one whether they want to or not, But what's the link, if there even is one at all? It seems that while the image of a man transforming into a beast under the light of a full moon had been popularized by 20th century monster movies such as 1943's Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. I mean, I would make fun of that, but we did have, didn't we have Batman meets Superman, not too long ago? Shit, it was probably a while ago now. But, yeah, I mean, it's not the most creative thing in the world, is it? Also, that movie kind of sucked. There are some historical folkloric examples to back up the idea. In 1865, Sabine Baring-Gould wrote The Book of Werewolves, being an account of terrible superstition, which handily compiles lots of stories into one book. Here are some examples of the moon playing a role in the transformation process. Petronius, a 1st century CE Roman novelist, wrote this story about a man accompanied by a soldier, quoting, "We set out about cockcrow." All right, cockcrow. "And the moon shone bright as..." Oh, cockcrow. It's going to be like the crow of a cockerel, right? So he means dawn. Ha, look at that. Everyone immediately got that. It took me a minute to work it out. "And the moon shone bright as day. When, coming along some monuments, my man began to converse with the stars, whilst I jogged along singing and counting them. Presently I looked back after him, and saw him strip and lay his clothes by the side of the road. My heart was in my mouth in an instant. I stood like a corpse when, in a crack, he was turned into a wolf. Don't think I'm joking? I would not tell you a lie, for the finest fortune in the world." Okay, then you were smoking something, because this is obviously not real. Baring-Gould later writes in Chapter 8, folklore relating to werewolves, quote, "If traditions of werewolves are scanty in England, it is quite the reverse if we cross the water. In the south of France, it is believed that the fate has destined certain men to be lycanthropists, that they are transformed into wolves at a full moon. The desire to run comes upon them at night. They leave their beds, jump out of a window, and plunge into a fountain. After the bath, they come out covered with dense fur, walking on all fours, and commence a raid over fields and meadows through woods and villages, biting all beasts and human beings that come into their way. At the approach of dawn, they return to the spring, plunge into it, lose their furry skins, and regain their deserted beds." This book was published in 1865, so presumably that means that belief in werewolves was still alive and well in the late 19th century, but it also nails down the full moon thing decades before any monster movie did. Baring-Gould goes on to note, in the Perigord, the werewolf is called Loloro. Certain men, especially bastards, are obliged at each full moon to transform themselves into these diabolical beasts. Poor bastards, it's not their fault. There are other reasons. Yeah, but then just lock yourself in the basement. They can't figure out the lock. Just be like, you know you're going to turn into a wolf. You can prepare for this situation. I don't know, just get some handcuffs. Wolf's not going to be able to break through a pair of handcuffs. Just tie yourself up with a chain. It's not that hard. I think you just like murdering. There are other references to moons being prominent when it comes to transformations, but generally they were only mentioned to show that it was nighttime, and werewolves are unilaterally described as having forced transformations at night. I began to wonder if the moon specifically was a trigger for the transformations, regardless of what stage it was in, and found this question on Quora.com. Quora.com is rapidly... I used to think Quora.com was quite good, but it's rapidly becoming more and more like Yahoo Answers. They say, will a werewolf change if it is inside and has no exposure to the moonlight? What sort of question is this? It's like, no, it's not real. At first thought, interesting question. But then I realized that if it was that easy to block the transformation, every werewolf would just stay inside with the curtains drawn once a month. Yeah, but then again, also every werewolf would just stay inside, lock themselves in the basement once a month. I mean, come on. Then I saw an answer that said, you realise that werewolves are fiction, so it largely depends on the demands of the plot. So yes, maybe I was overthinking it. There's also no link between real wolves howling at the moon either. We've all seen Amazon's favourite t-shirt, the 3-wolf moon. Yes, please. A full moon surrounded by 3 howling wolf heads, which led to some of the best online reviews you'll ever read. Yeah, it's generally about, it's a super nerdy shirt if you don't know this meme. And it's basically all the reviews are like, I put on this shirt and instantly women became attracted to me. They could ignore the fact that I'm wearing a 4XL. The wolves made it too powerful for them to resist me. You might hear them howling when the moon is full, but that's because it means it's nighttime and everything's quieter, and you're therefore more likely to hear them. If you hear a wolf howling, it could be for a variety of reasons, but it's not because of or directed at the moon. How would that evolve evolutionarily? It just turns out it's advantageous for us to howl at the moon. So that's what we do as wolves. There must be some links between werewolves and the lunar cycle, though, surely. Some people swear that lunar cycles and menstrual cycles are in some way connected, so couldn't that also affect werewolf transformations or behavior? It seems silly to debunk something that's fiction to begin with, but, here goes. 1. Lunar and menstrual cycles are not linked. What? Katie, no way! I mean, I don't have a menstrual cycle, being a dude and all.
Really? Wow.
But I'm pretty sure I knew that they're not linked to the moon, because that would be silly. Regardless of how much you may believe they are, and I've known at least one person who was very into this theory. The fact that an average menstrual cycle happens every 28 days and lasts 3 to 5 days. The fact is that an average menstrual cycle happens every 28 days and lasts 3 to 5 days. Apparently, the length of a total lunar cycle from new moon to new moon is 29.5 days. There are going to be some times when this syncs up, just as how, if there is more than one menstruating person in a household, there is going to be some frequent overlap, seeing as how you're basically doing this for the best part of a week a month, every month for the last 3 decades. For at least 3 decades. But I digress. Historically, the vast majority of werewolf examples have been men, so this lunar theory doesn't even affect them. If the moon had any effect on men's bodies, we'd never hear the end of it. So I think we can close the book on if the moon affects real-life wolves or werewolves. Yes, easily. And also truth. The instances of a full moon being mentioned in yeah, if it was like once a month the moon starts affecting me, if I had a menstrual cycle, I'd use that as an excuse for anything, dude. I'd be like, no, I can't. I've got to lie in today. And the moon's out. The instances of a full moon being mentioned in past literature in conjunction with werewolf transformation is minimal and not something specifically called as a trigger for transformation. It appears more to be something done for creative effect in later films, which then caught on and became part of the lore as we know it. While the moon does make appearances in past mentions of werewolves, it's probably just to highlight the fact that these changes take place at night, and if it's nighttime, you generally mention the moon. In the passage from Bar and Gould that we just heard, he mentions a man jumping into a fountain to become a werewolf, then jumping into it again to turn back. This element of the story hasn't stuck at all, but it makes about the same amount of sense as the moon triggering a transformation. In werewolf lore, it's also the case that a transformation under the full moon is involuntary, i.e. will happen whether the person wants to transform or not. It's also usually portrayed as being very painful. Some branches of the myth have this as the only time that a transformation will occur, but others say that a werewolf can also transform at will. In Eclogue 8 by the Roman poet Virgil, there is a reference to someone turning into a wolf. Here's a translation from 1934 of the relevant passage by J.W. McHale. These herbs and these poisons gathered in Pontus, Maurus himself gave me. In Pontus they grow thickest. By their might I have often seen Maurus become a wolf and plunge into the forest. Often seen him call up souls from their deep graves and transplant the harvests to where they were not sown. Sounds like this herb might be like some sort of mushroom, perhaps? Some sort of magical mushroom, maybe? Because you're seeing things, my dude. This could refer to Maurus turning into a wolf or just by eating these herbs, but is more likely referencing to being under the influence of said herbs and doing a whole lot of hallucinating. Katie and I, same page. And whoever this McNeil guy is, McHale. Wait, no. He's the translator. Or whatever. Another thing intrinsic to the werewolf legend is the power of silver over them. They can be killed, or wait, maybe it is werewolves and not vampires. No, vampires, there's silver bullet to a vampire, no? Or like a silver stake. No, a wooden stake. Oh, it is silver bullets for werewolves, isn't it? They can be killed or warded away with silver objects, and they can be held in chains of silver to stop them running around and killing everyone. Well, in that case, just use those silver handcuffs. You know you're going to turn into a werewolf, just use the silver handcuffs and concrete them to the floor. A silver bullet is usually the first thing you think of as a way to kill a werewolf, but where has this link to a specific metal come from, and what did people use to kill them before guns were invented? Traditionally, silver is seen as a pure substance, i.e. linked to holiness, and since ancient times it's been used to denote purity. I mean, it makes sense, it's an element. Used for protection and... I had a moment of doubt there about whether silver is an element, but obviously yes. Used for protection and has been known for its antibacterial properties. This means it would work well against the forces of evil and as a counter to a curse, of course, naturally. In alchemy, 7 metals were tied to 7 planets, or rather astronomical bodies. Silver was associated with the moon, so I suppose that's a pretty solid link in the werewolf lore chain. Before bullets and guns, silver could still be worked into things like daggers or swords, or used to tip things like arrows or canes, which is how the Wolfman in the 1941 film of the same name meets his demise, as he gets whacked over the head with a silver-topped walking stick. If you think about it, the whole silver aspect seems redundant, as bludgeoning anything on the head with a heavy object will probably do it damage, or shooting, yeah, but it's a werewolf, so maybe not. Otherwise you'd be like, I mean, you could make the same argument. Surely shooting the werewolf with an automatic shotgun, regular one, over and over again is going to cause some damage. But I guess the point is it doesn't, because that's why you need the silver bullets. Or shooting anything with a bullet might spell a death, but that's why werewolf lore has got either supernatural regenerative abilities or just imperviousness to most normal weapons built, which is pretty cool. Yeah, if werewolves were real, the military would be studying the shit out of that, and also just wrapping their tanks in werewolf skin.
No.
They'd be harvesting werewolves. Werewolves would be farmed. There'd be a whole ethical debate over whether they're people or not. They'd keep them in their werewolf form and just get them to the maximum size as quickly as possible, and then harvest the skins and use them to put on the Abrams tank and shit. Went down that hole a bit too far, didn't I? Let's carry on. I also saw on Britannica.com that this part of the legends might have come from a real-life example of a French farmer killing a beast using silver bullets in 1767. This rang a bell, and indeed, former topic, the beast of Gardavon, was killed in 1767 with what has been described as a silver bullet. Is this the origin of the pseudo-fact that we all know silver bullets kill werewolves? Well, not really, because silver was already used as a protective metal before 1767, so if it was used in this case, it was probably because its properties were already known. A letter from a local Frenchwoman in 1765 to a relative talking about the beast said, "We tried to shoot him with bullets of iron, lead, silver. Nothing could penetrate. We must hope that in the end we overcome it." Well then, have you tried depleted uranium? So the silver bullet aspect didn't originate here because it didn't apparently work. Also, a detail of the story has it that a medal of the Virgin Mary was used to create the bullet that killed the beast, making it extra holy as well as silver. However, this has been disputed by critics as a literary invention or a distorted detail. A literary invention from the very real werewolf canon. As a final point, reports of the Beast of Gardavon from the time make no mention that anyone thought it was a werewolf, so we can't point to this as a nexus of the trope. I think what we can gather is that silver as a known protective charm was fashioned into weapons long before bullets were invented, but when they were, it was used in bullets too. Eventually these bullets were shot at wolves, real or imaginary, and gradually the things got linked together, especially in more modern times where seeing things in films helps to cement them into the narrative. And speaking of films, nowadays modern movies have taken it to new levels, with the Underworld series, for example, having silver bullets for any type of automatic weapon, silver grenades, and silver shurikens to lob at lupine foes. And what did these poor sods do to deserve it? Actually, the Lycans in the Underworld series. I've never heard of the Underworld series. Wait, is that Blade? Blade's a vampire, right? What is Underworld? Aren't transport traditional werewolves, as per the popular lore, but we'll probably circle back to these differences nearer the end. I say probably because, to be honest, it might not be that interesting. We'll see how it goes. The curse of being a werewolf is usually linked to something bad that the person did and is being punished for. Therefore, the involuntary transformation is part and parcel of the curse. If you could turn into a werewolf whenever you wanted, that'd be a pretty cool superpower and not the intended outcome for a person who is cursed. No, it'd be pretty cool if you could just become I really need to travel a long way. Being like a big dog would be pretty good right now. Although if you lose control and want to destroy people, then probably not super useful as a superpower. It seems that, in the past at least, having done something monstrous led to you becoming a monster, so the transformation into a wolf was reserved for people like King Lycon, who had killed someone and tried to trick Zeus into eating them. Alright. As you do. As time went on, people in medieval Europe, for example, would equate physical characteristics with the possible animalistic nature of the subject, a topic that we'll dive into shortly. All those people not shaving their unibrows. Turning into a raging beast was seen as undesirable, so it was undesirable people that it happened to. Modern depictions of werewolves in film and TV haven't necessarily bought into the already looks like a werewolf, so must be a werewolf line of thinking, though, so centuries-old pointers of things to look out for, such as the unibrow, low ears, or hairy tongue, have largely died out, as that's not what a teenage girl is going to pay to see at the movies. Certainly not. These days, anyone can be a werewolf, and actually, the sexier and more ripped they are in human form, allegedly, the more likely they are to be one. Oh, what is... Oh, wait, in the Twilight movies, there's vampires and the werewolves, right? And they fight. I remember that. God, that movie was terrible. But that's only been the case in very recent times. Let's go back to the past, to a time when people thought werewolves were real, and look at some historical examples of lycanthropy. Why wolves? The trials of lycanthropes. This is the interesting part for me. The times when people have either been accused of being werewolves or have admitted to being them. It's like, yeah, no, I'm a werewolf. It's like, dude, no, you just occasionally black out. You got like epilepsy or some shit. Not epilepsy. Narcolepsy. We said at the start that lycanthropy has two meanings. That of the supernatural act of turning into a wolf, and also the mental illness where people think that they are turning into wolves. From our lofty modern post, we can clearly see that anyone accused of being a werewolf in the past was either suffering from a delusion or was being persecuted for having a unibrow. But the people of the past, while sometimes acknowledging that the so-called werewolf might have been mentally unwell, generally weren't all that interested in the whys and wherefores of their behavior and just wanted to get to the punishing part. Bloody bloodthirsty people from the past, completely different to us today in our enlightened era of zero bloodshed. Let's take a look at some historical examples that made such an impression we can still read about them today. Forget about witch trials, there were many werewolf trials carried out in parts of Europe throughout the 14th to 17th centuries. In fact, according to the website bizarrobazaar.com, over 100,000 people were executed on werewolf charges in Europe over this time period. That's a lot of shapeshifting. That's a lot of 100,000 people. Oh, over 300 years though. Still feels like a lot. They also were generally thought to be worshippers of Satan, which didn't exactly help their cause. One of the most well-known was that of Peter Stubb, also called Peter Stump for Stump because it's hard to keep people's names straight when literacy is low and the language is complete shambles. Yeah, like, standardized spelling didn't come around until, like, surprisingly recently. It's why old books read weird, because people are like, I don't know, maybe this is how you spell for. Who knows? Who gives a shit? In Bedburg in Germany in 1589, he was allegedly witnessed turning into a wolf and ended up being blamed for multiple murders over the span of 25 years. How was he doing this? Why, under interrogation and threat of torture, he confessed having a magic belt or girdle given to him by the devil himself. When he put it on, he turned into a wolf and went on to kill to his heart's content. If this belt could be found, it would be concrete proof in the werewolf story, but perhaps not surprisingly, the magic shapeshifting girdle was never located. According to George Bors, who wrote an article called The Damnable Life and Death of Stubb Peter in 1590, said, at his apprehension, he confessed he cast it off in a certain valley, and there left it, which, when the magistrates heard, they sent to the valley for it, but at their coming found nothing at all, for it may be supposed that it was gone to the devil from whence it came, so that it was not to be found. Yes, that's what happened. It's not that you just didn't happen to find it, it went back to hell. So yes, it wasn't that this girdle never existed, and was a made-up product of mind and body under torture. Oh no, the devil must have taken it. I don't know if or it just never existed in the first place, of course, a way more obvious explanation. I don't know if Stubb was responsible for any murders, but it was the werewolf aspects to this story that grabbed everyone's attention. Well, that and the fact that this dude appears to have been the single most disgusting specimen of any species to ever walk the earth. We're told in lurid detail about his incestuous relationship with his own daughter. Then George Bors relates this snippet, quote, in the shape and likeness of a wolf, he encountered his own son, and there most cruelly slew him, which done, he presently ate the brains out of his head, as a most savoury and dainty delicious meal to staunch his greedy appetite. the most monstrous act that ever man heard of, for never was known a wrench from nature so far degenerate. Well, one, that was a nightmare to read, and two, it's a weird story. Again, I have no clue if he actually did kill his own son or not, but if he did, it wasn't in the form of a wolf. The witnesses to his alleged metamorphosis appear to have been witnesses to just that, not to any of the actual murders. And the metamorphosis, as told by George Bors, who wasn't there at the time, is pretty open to criticism. He says that a group of hunters were chasing a wolf, and it disappeared, and where it should have been, there was a man walking instead. And this was Peter Stubb. I mean, it's not more likely that they were chasing a wolf and it got away and poor old Peter just came out of the bushes at the wrong time, is it? No, that's exactly what happens, and now they're like, we're going to shoot Peter in the head with a silver bullet. Yes! Here's what ended up happening to him per George Bors. Stubb Peter, as principal malefactor, was judged first to have his body laid on a wheel and with red-hot burning pincers in 10 several places to have the flesh pulled from his bones. After that, his legs and arms to be broken with a wooden axe or hatchet. Afterward, to have his head struck from his body, then to have his carcass burned to ashes. After the execution, there was, by the advice of the magistrates of the town of Bedburgh, a high pole set up and strongly framed, which first went through the wheel whereon he was broken. After that, a little above the wheel, the likeness of a wolf was framed in wood, to show unto all men the shape wherein he executed those cruelties. Over that, on top of the stake, the sorcerer's head itself was set up, and round about the wheel there hung 16 pieces of wood about a yard in length, which represented the 16 persons that was perfectly known to be murdered by him. Dude definitely walked out of the bushes at the wrong time, didn't he? They're like, there's the wolf, get him! And he's like, what? I was just picking berries! Please! His poor daughter, and someone else referred to as his gossip, Catherine Trompin, which I assume to be his girlfriends, were put to death for being accomplices, although they were saved the ignominy of being pulled apart and beheaded, and were just burned to death instead. Oh, thank God. Only being burned to death. The supernatural element of this case was what seems to have done it for Peter Stubb. I don't have a clue if he was responsible for any actual murders or not, but because he was seen as undesirable, the rumors got piled on until they literally broke him. Of course, he didn't have a magic belt that turned him into a wolf. This was either an excuse for his crimes, the byproduct of a deluded mind, or a totally false confession made up under torture. Yeah, that's the problem with torture. It's really painful. And if you don't have the answer that the interrogator wants, you're going to make up an answer that they want because you really want the torture to stop.
Stop fisting me!
It's torture. The region had been hit by a series of especially bloody murders, and this seemed to be a neat way of dealing with them. It seems that in this case, if you'll pardon the mixed metaphors, Stubb was a scapegoat in wolf's clothing. Punish him for abusing his daughter, punish him for murdering multiple people, but please don't hang this weird werewolf explanation around his neck. A few years later, in 1598, another example of the crime of lycanthropy cropped up, this time in Angers in France. Here's the beginning of the story from Sabine Baring-Gould's book, The Book of Werewolves, quoting, "In a wild and unfrequented spot near Claude, some countrymen came one day upon the corpse of a boy of 15, horribly mutilated and bespattered with blood. As the men approached, 2 wolves, which had been rending the body, bounded away into the thicket. The men gave chase immediately, following their bloody tracks till they lost them. When suddenly, crouching among the bushes, his teeth chattering with fear, they found a man half naked, with long hair and beard, and with his hands dyed in blood. His nails were as long as claws, and were clotted with fresh gore and shreds of human flesh." Jesus Christ, people of the past, why? During his trial, the man, whose name was Jacques Rillet, confessed to having killed the boy and said that he could transform into a wolf by rubbing on an ointment or salve that his parents had given him. How about you don't rub on the ointment and salve then? Boom, problem solved, no longer a wolf. He also claimed that the 2 wolves the witnesses had seen were his brother and cousin, John and Julian, and they had used the wolf salve too. John and Julian be like, dude, what the fuck, man? You trying to get me executed? I was at home, you dick. John and Julian were able to prove that they were nowhere near the scene of the crime at the time, and Robert's testimony does seem pretty shaky, at least according to Baring-Gould's description, with him at times confirming that parts of him literally turned into wolf parts and other times making it seem merely metaphorical. Here's a piece of the trial as per Baring-Gould. "When rubbed with this ointment, do you become a wolf? No, but for all that, I killed and ate the child. I was a wolf. Were you dressed as a wolf? I was dressed as I am now. I had my hands and my face bloody because I'd been eating the flesh of said child. Do your hands and feet become the paws of a wolf? Yes, they do. In this instance, it seems that some sort of sense prevailed as Roulet, after initially being sentenced to death for murder, lycanthropy, and cannibalism, was on appeal given 2 years imprisonment in a madhouse. I mean, 2 years isn't much for killing and trying to eat someone, but I suppose they realized that he wasn't fully mentally aware of what he was doing. Doesn't seem like it, does he? He seems properly wacko. It seems that a lot of lycanthropy crimes were happening in France and Germany, and this has been put down to moral panic or collective fear, the likes of which can still be seen today with things like the satanic panic epidemic of the 1980s or the late 1900s, as my landlord likes to call it. Oh, that's good. The late 1900s. That sounds like so long ago. I was born in the late 1900s. Oh my God. Oh no, that sounds so old. Although I suppose anyone who's 26 was, so is that old? 38 this year. Getting on. It's just one of those things that catches on and spreads, but is usually found to be pretty much baseless, or at least about 1% as fanciful as the stories people are telling about it. A slightly different example comes from Ansbach in Germany in the year 1685, and if you think everyone was being a bit hysterical over the transformations from men into wolves, that wasn't always the case. As we alluded to, the scape-wolfing of Peter Stubb in the late 1500s, Bizarro Bizarre states in a post titled The Werewolf of Ansbach, werewolf trials sometimes involved stratified levels of meaning which were far from being unintentional. So what could this mean? Don't worry, I'm going to tell you now. This is a kind of reverse werewolf story, almost a meta-werewolf story. In 1685, Michael Lecht, the Burgermeister of Ansbach, died. A Burgermeister, or Burgermaster, means master of the citizens. I'm disappointed he's not master of the burgers.
Well, it's actually German. It means master of dudes.
Some sort of grill master. And is likely a powerful mayor-type figure. Anyway, everyone hated him, and he was apparently a pretty awful person. Around the same time, a wolf started attacking local livestock, ramped up to attacking humans, and eventually killed several small children. Because of this unusually aggressive behavior, word started spreading that this was a werewolf, and not only that it was a werewolf, but that it was none other than dead Burgermaster Michael Licht himself, who had managed to transform his spirit into a wolf's body to continue his reign of terror on the people of Ansbach. A trap was dug for the wolf, which fell in and was dispatched with relative ease. That wasn't the end of it, though. To fully exorcise the Burgomaster's spirit from the city, the wolf was skinned and dressed up in a cloak with a wig on its head. Why do you have to skin it first before getting it dressed? It's so creepy, just a skinned wolf wearing clothes. Why? Its muzzle was cut off, and a mask of Light's face was put on it. Dressed in this bizarre and frankly ghoulish attire, it was strung up on a hill so that everyone could see it. It's fucking creepy, guys. A translation of a poem written at the time about this reads in part, "Ah, you damned spirit who entered the wolf, you now swing from the gallows disguised as a man. This is your fair compensation, the gift you have earned. This you deserve, your gibbet is your grave. Take this reward, because you have devoured the sons of men, like a fierce and ferocious beast, a real child-eater." As you can see, there is more than one thing going on here. We can go back to Bizarro Bizarre to explain this as follows, quote, "On the one hand, depriving the wolf of his fur and replacing it with human clothes meant showing Satan himself that his tricks did not work. The townspeople of Ansbach were able to recognize the man concealing under the fur. This was therefore a warning, addressed to the devil himself. This is how your evil servants end up around here. On the other hand, there was an undeniable political aspect. This was a by proxy execution of the former ruler. The commoners who had failed to overthrow their oppressor while he was alive did so post-mortem. In any case, the political message was clear, even for those who did not believe in werewolves. This act was meant to mark the end of a dark era. Now, there are many, many more examples we could give of people being accused of being werewolves, but they all boil down to the same thing. Someone has committed some horrible murders or has been accused of committing horrible murders. They either confess to being a werewolf because they have a mental illness, because they're pretending to have a mental illness, or because they're being railroaded into it. Yeah, by railroad, they're having their fingernails pulled out. It's like, all right, fuck it, I'm a werewolf, Jesus. Please, no more fingernails. They are then either executed or sent to some kind of asylum, bringing that particular werewolf case to a close. I think we can also bring this chapter to a close and move on to other things that might cause people to think werewolves are real. It's time to get medical. Howlwolves, debunking the myth. Alright, we've had stories of people acting in a wolf-like way and even admitting that they're werewolves. So let's take a clinical look at it and go into the unfortunately real delusion that you can turn into an animal known as clinical lycanthropy. While we're talking about wolves in particular, the term clinical lycanthropy acts as an umbrella term to mean other sorts of animals too, not just wolves. There have been cases, for example, of people thinking they've been turned into bees.
And he happens to be the nicest bee I've met in a long time.
Oh my god, okay. An article by Rajit Shrestha, MD, on psychiatryonline.org states, clinical lycanthropy is a rare form of reverse intermetamorphosis wherein patients believe that they are undergoing transformation or have transformed into a non-human animal. A case of such a delusional misidentification involving the self is presented here. Maybe some of the many thousands of people killed for being werewolves in the past did actually suffer from this psychiatric issue, but if you think that cases of lycanthropy have been relegated to the distant past, well, think again. In 2016, Florida student Austin Haroof, I made a casual criminalist about this. This was a sad story. Murdered a random couple in cold blood following an argument with his family. He was found on top of the male victim, growling and chewing on his face. A toxicology report ruled out any drugs that might have tipped him over the edge, and in 2019, forensic psychologist Dr. Philip Resnick produced a report saying that Haroof had believed he was half dog, half man at the time of the attacks. According to Palm Beach Post, his professional diagnosis was that, quote, Haroof suffered from severe mental disease, in particular bipolar disorder, and acute manic episodes with psychotic features and clinical lycanthropy delusions, also known as werewolf syndrome. In 2022, he was found not guilty of the murders by reason of insanity and was sent to a mental hospital instead. In his article titled Clinical Lycanthropy, Delusional Misidentification of the Self, published in 2014, Rajit Shrestha presents another case of a 20-year-old man who had started sporadically acting like an animal, running on all fours, crawling around and howling. All right. This unnamed man later claimed to be a werewolf and said that he had visions of the devil and heard voices. He was put on an antipsychotic drug, which eventually caused his animal episodes to stop. Well, boom, there we go. Explanation. He was psychotic. We can see in both these recent cases that there is definitely some already existing mental illness happening before the lycanthropy rears its head. Austin Haroof's father had said there was schizophrenia on his side of the family, and the unnamed 20-year-old also had a family history of bipolar disorder. As per Wikipedia, clinical lycanthropy is a very rare condition and is largely considered to be an idiosyncratic expression of a psychotic or dissociative episode caused by another condition such as dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or clinical depression. This means that if anybody does start showing signs that they think they're becoming an animal, it is usually effectively treated with antipsychotics and mood stabilizers. Another medical condition that might make people think they're werewolves is a condition called hypertrichosis. That's where you grow hair everywhere. I wish I had that on my head. Hypertrichosis. Instead, I have no trichosis. Hypotrichosis, which is basically when someone is really, really hairy. You can either be born with it, which is very rare, or possibly acquire it later in life through the side effects of a drug, a hormonal or metabolic imbalance, or certain forms of cancer that makes you hairy. All right. There are various forms of hypertrichosis, meaning that certain areas of your body are covered in fine hair, thicker hair, or hair like the hair on your head. And in most extreme cases, the whole face and body are covered in thick pigmented hair. This is known as congenital terminal hypertrichosis. And if that wasn't bad enough, it can also come with a side of gingival hyperplasia, which means that your gums grow larger in certain areas, making your teeth look more pointed and potentially animal-like. Whoa. I think we can put these two things together and see why it's called human werewolf syndrome. There have been fewer than 100 cases of congenital terminal hypertrichosis since the first recorded case of Petrus Gonsalves in 1537, but because it's a genetic mutation, there are still people being born with it now. Not very many, though. Back in the day, some people with hypertrichosis ended up joining circuses to at least try and make some money and gain some level of fame for their unfortunate conditions. Fyodor Jefferchu was one of the most well-known. Russian-born in 1868, he inherited hypertrichosis from his father, who had been performing under the stage name The Wild Man from Kostroma Forest. Jefferchu became known as Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy when he joined P.T. Barnum's circus in 1884, and when he grew up a bit, he was called Jojo the Dog-Faced Man. Creative. One day I won't be Fact Boy, I'll just be Fact Man. Straight up, maybe when I'm 40. If you see pictures of him, he indeed has long hair all over his face, covering his forehead, cheeks, and everything but his eyes and mouth. Yes, a picture of him here. He kind of looks like that Star Wars dude. I don't know, the hairy dude in Star Wars. I'm not that ignorant. I do know his name. Chewbacca. Thank you. Big brain. He actually looks a bit like Chewbacca in the picture I saw. Yes, there we go. And his last name was Jeffachew. I don't know what that means. Chewbacca Jeffachew? Coincidence? I briefly looked into Chewbacca's naming story to see if it came from Jeffachew. Oh, like chewy. But apparently the Russian word for dog sounds like sabaka, and it came out of that. But there was a dog-faced boy with a chew in his name before everyone's favourite Wookiee, so there you go. Unfortunately for Fedor, Barnum really played up the dog part of the act, ostensibly making him act like one to match his hairy appearance, when obviously he had no more natural animal instincts than anybody else does. He died very early from pneumonia at the age of 36, but his legacy lived on in references in shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The X-Files, and the movie The Greatest Showman. The title of World's Hairiest Child was given to Sapatra Sasuphan, an 11-year-old girl from Thailand in 2011. A representative from Guinness World Records measured the amount of hair on various areas of her body before giving her the crown. Sasuphan told Guinness, "Being hairy makes me special. This is the happiest day of my life." She soon got sick of it, though, as by 2018, the then 17-year-old had shaved it all off and got married, presumably relegating her world record-breaking hairiness to the second happiest day of her life. You may have also heard of the Aceves family from Mexico who carry the genetic mutation leading to hypertrichosis. Jesus Aceves was born in 1968 with the condition, which is believed to have originated with his great-grandmother. Now, about 30 members of the Aceves family have hypertrichosis to varying degrees. The mutation is linked to an X chromosome, meaning that if a father has it, his daughters will also have it, but not his sons. If a mother has it, her children have a 50% chance of inheriting the mutation. You may also be wondering if anything can be done about it, and the answer is mixed. While the gene has been identified, nothing has really been made of it, and it can't yet be turned on or off. It has not been particularly useful in providing cures for baldness, hair loss, or alopecia. Yet, Katie, yet, we're all excited. If you don't want to have a hair-covered face, there are things you can do, such as shaving, but this is time-consuming and the hair still grows back. Some of the Aceves family even have hair on their eyelids, making it practically impossible to get rid of. Laser treatment or electrolysis would take far too long and is too expensive for the family for the amount of sessions necessary, and the results may not be permanent anyway. To bring it back to our actual subject matter, people with werewolf syndrome are merely very hairy and sometimes have bizarre gum lines. They are not in any way animalistic, aggressive, or have shape-shifting abilities. No shit. It doesn't take a genius to realize, though, that should a stranger with hypertrichosis have wandered into town in France or Germany in the 15th and 16th century, they probably wouldn't have been welcomed with open arms. As a side note, a drug specifically for the treatment of hair loss was accidentally given to a batch of at least 17 young children and babies when it was somehow mixed up with gastric reflux medication. This happened in Spain in 2019 and caused hypertrichosis all over the bodies of the patients. I need some of this drug shit. I believe the condition subsided when they stopped taking the medicine, but for a brief period, there was an outbreak of werewolf syndrome in various parts of Spain. While it appeared to be very effective, the exact drug involved in the mix-up has since been withdrawn. I need to get my hands on that withdrawn drug. Next episode, just be like hairy like a beast everywhere. Probably the top of my head would just still remain perfectly bald, though. Hey-ho. Another possible werewolf imposter is Rabies. Remember the king Lycon, who was turned into a wolf by Zeus? In Ovid's Metamorphoses, the final line about it said, "A wolf, he retains yet a large trace of his ancient expression. Hoary he is as afore, his countenance rabid, his eyes glitter savagely still, the picture of fury." Rabies is a viral disease that humans can get via bites or scratches from infected animals. Rabies is terrifying. It's 100% fatal, or 99.99999%. If you get bitten by a rabid animal, you can get the vaccination and you can have it taken care of. But if you don't, if you become symptomatic, you're dead. There's nothing they can do at the point you become symptomatic. And I remember I knew a doctor back in the day who did some I think it was MSF, the Doctors Without Borders, and he was saying how on one of his rotations or whatever, he was in some hospital And like they went round and saw this patient who had rabies, and he was like, "F that dude." He said it was just like crazy. Many animals can carry rabies, including dogs, bats, foxes, skunks, raccoons, and rarely sheep, goats, and small rodents like mice and rats. Wolves can also carry the disease, although they're more likely to become infected by it from contact with other wild animals. Cases of rabies in humans are rare nowadays, but it will be fatal if left untreated after the initial exposure. Early signs include irritation at the site of the wound, fever, and other flu-like symptoms. The virus then travels to the brain and causes hallucinations and confusion. Yeah, you become hydrophobic. So you become afraid of water? Like, you just can't drink it. Add to this the classic sign of foaming at the mouth and behavioral abnormalities such as yelling and an increase in aggression, and you can see why people might have come to the conclusion that the person was half man, half beast, or was somebody in the process of turning into a wild animal. They would also become more wild in appearance, as they wouldn't be able to look after themselves and might develop a fear of water, so are unlikely one to pop into the shower. This type of rabies is actually called furious rabies. With about 2/3 of rabies sufferers getting this variant. The other third get paralytic rabies and become weaker and less able to move as the disease progresses. The Cleveland Clinic estimates that while fewer than 3 people die of rabies per year in the US, there are about 59,000 deaths from rabies worldwide annually. And trust me, you don't want to be one of them. I'm surprised 3 people die of rabies in the US. Is there? I guess so. It's apparently still rabies. Another potential disease that could have misidentified someone as a werewolf is Porphyria, which is a possible contributor to vampire lore too. Porphyria is a blood disorder that causes a buildup of porphyrins, which are related to red blood cells. According to Scientific American, these porphyrins accumulate in the skin and other organs before being excreted in feces and urine, which may turn a port wine color. Exposed to light, the porphyrins can turn caustic and destroy surrounding tissue. Jesus. This means that in some cases, sunlight can cause blistering on the skin, hence the link to vampires being destroyed by the sun. There are different forms of porphyria, but one includes a strain that can cause excess hair to grow on a person's face and even discolor their teeth, along with a photosensitivity that could add up to potential werewolf accusations. The last possible real-life werewolf thing that we're going to talk about briefly is feral children. I saw a documentary on this once, and will never forget a Ukrainian girl called Oksana barking and bounding about on all fours. She was basically raised by dogs after her parents abandoned her in the yard as a toddler and spent at least 5 years living, sleeping, eating, and communicating and playing with a group of them. I started to search up her name and only got to Oksana in Google for it to bring her back as the first result, so I guess I'm not the only person that she left an impression on. In times past, these children may have been abandoned in the woods due to medical or developmental conditions, meaning that along with animal behaviors they learned by copying what was around them, they also failed to develop language, making them even more of a mystery to anyone who came across them. Where this factors into our tale is that feral children have been a thing for a while, so a wild child or older teen encountered in a forest may look and behave like what some people may associate with a werewolf. Werewolves. What are werewolves up to these days? Despite the obvious holes we can poke in the werewolf story, they still remain popular folk monsters today and are a special staple in the TV and movie world. Just this year in 2025, a movie called Wolfman was released, and we've had multiple TV and movie versions of the Teen Wolf story. I'm not a particular fan of the werewolf genre. Yeah, me neither. In Twilight.
I'm a wolf. I'm an actual wolf. I'm 3 wolves. And a moon.
But even I, off the top of my head, can list Wolf, Ginger Snaps, Dog Soldiers, and the Underworld films, and An American Werewolf in London as containing werewolves as a main plot point. I've seen none of those movies. While they often play second fiddle to vampires, usually coming across as their intellectual inferiors, werewolves have also popped up in TV shows such as True Blood, What We Do in the Shadows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and of course, Being Human. What about Twilight? Twilight?
That person, Edward. That person, Edward.
There's also a show called Hemlock Grove, which I haven't seen, but apparently the werewolf's transformation is by having a wolf literally emerge from inside the body of the human, starting off through the mouth. It then eats the skin it bursts out of. If this sounds like a one-way transformation, it isn't. The human eventually re-emerges from inside the wolf. Gross, Jesus Christ. It sounds like someone had a nightmare and made a TV show about it. I haven't mentioned them much, because they sucked, but the Twilight books and subsequent films also had a strong werewolf contingent, and I believe the idea of werewolves imprinting on humans, whether they've been born yet or not, stems from this franchise. I wasn't able to find any earlier example online, or indeed hardly any examples at all that didn't mention Jacob and or the appallingly named Renesmee. I don't remember Renesmee. I was talking about this topic to my friend Julian online, and his succinct summary was, God, those movies are so weird. Julian is correct. Imprinting does seem to have made its way into several paranormal romance genres, however, and werewolf romance is a big thing, as I found out when I idly looked at a job ad for a staff writer for said genre. How hard could it be? The ad said, the ideal candidate is a seasoned writer with deep experience writing werewolf romance stories in screenplay, novel, web fiction, or audio format, and must have demonstrable experience in the werewolf romance genre with samples or an online portfolio available for review. It's a remarkably specific job requirement. Well, I don't have any of that, so I had to let that one go. But werewolf romance is a popular subcategory in paranormal romance. I guess I can kind of see the appeal when the werewolves are all hot and sexy in human form, but the undercurrent of bestiality, not so much for me. I've never read one of these though, so I don't know if that's the path it goes down or whether it tends to steer away from that fairly troubling aspect. Look, given what I know about the internet and like the huge proliferation of like romance / erotica books, I mean, there's a book called Taken by the T-Rex, like famously. It's about the bestiality, isn't it? It's gonna be. Have I read any of it? No. Am I making an assumption? Yes. Is my assumption correct? Probably. I suppose we should also mention the differences between lycans and werewolves now, if we're doing this properly. This is totally arbitrary, as there weren't such distinctions drawn in the early days of werewolf lore, and basically anybody can make up their own rules for supernatural creatures anyway. For example, sparkling skin vampires in Twilight instead of crumbling to dust vampires when they see the sun. I believe that the distinction between lycans and werewolves was mainly a product of the Underworld franchise, but it's kind of seeped out further than that now, so for the uninitiated, here are the main differences. Lycans maintain more of a human appearance after transformation, while werewolves become almost totally animal. Oh, thank God, I'm glad we cleared this up, because otherwise I feel like I'd have walked away from this episode not having learned something important, and now I have. Sarcasm. Lycans keep better control over their intelligence and behavior as opposed to poor old dumb werewolves who just can't help themselves but run amok everywhere. Lycans are more likely to be able to transform at will, whereas werewolves need a trigger such as the moon or being in a heightened emotional state. Okay, so clearly way better to be a lycan. Reading Ab Galatea has plenty of werewolf romance stories to choose from, of course it does, including apparently the #1 best-selling werewolf romance series, The Millennium Wolves. According to a post titled Lycans vs. Werewolves, 6 differences you did not know about, which actually only really contained 2 differences, said in 3 different ways, quote, in romance books, especially in contemporary romance, lycans are usually shown as smart, calm, in control of their emotions. Even when they're in their wolf form, they can still think like a human, which helps them interact with people and form strong, meaningful connections. That makes them more steady and dependable as romantic partners. I mean, if you really want a shapeshifter as a romantic partner, that is so weird, dude. Conversely, if you want to get it on with a werewolf, here's what you need to know. Quotes. Again, so glad I'm learning something this episode, because otherwise I'd have no idea how to get it on with a werewolf. Werewolves tend to follow their instincts more, especially when they transform. They might be a bit driven by strong emotions like anger, desire, or fear, which makes them less predictable and a bit more dangerous. Their struggle to balance their human and wolf sides adds extra tension to their relationships. Werewolf romances tend to be more about wild, passionate love. The tension comes from their struggle to keep their human side in check, and their relationships often face more challenges, like the danger they might pose to their partner or the fear of losing control. So yes, I think if there were a danger my partner might rip me to pieces at any given second, that would actually put me off the whole idea, not make it extra hot. But that's just me. Thankfully, this whole issue of maybe accidentally falling for a werewolf is moot, because werewolves are not real. Well, we started off with the historical and ended with the somewhat silly, but hopefully it's been an entertaining ride. Indeed, I had a good time. I think the most important lesson to come out of this is don't be suspicious in middle-aged Europe, and if you have a close encounter with a wild animal, go and get a bloody rabies shot. Indeed! And that's where we end today's episode. Thanks for being here.